much for being with us today. We are thrilled to host this session featuring Kate Peaslee, who is a lecturer in art appreciation in the TTU School of Art. And she's also a recipient of our Lawrence Schovanec Faculty Development Scholarship. And I'm sure that she'll share a little bit more about that as she's presenting. We are hosting these sessions as part of a series called Commitment to Teaching that is co-sponsored by the TLPDC and the Teaching Academy. And we're thrilled to hear Kate this morning speak about connections across the classroom and beyond. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Kate. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mitzi, and to the whole TLPDC crew and staff, and to those of you who took some time on this Tuesday morning late in the semester to join us today. I'm really happy to be here. Really thankful that you're here as well. I think I'll just go ahead and start sharing my screen, as we say, and start there. Okay, so as Mitzi indicated, the title of my talk today is Connections Across the Classroom. And what I hope to really share are some things that I learned at a recent pedagogy conference earlier this year, and the ways I've been able to translate them to our classroom or to my classroom, and keeping in mind the emergency situation created by COVID. It actually ended up, I think, kind of working in concert with some of the things that I was really struck by at this particular conference. So excuse me. Let me see if I can, hold on one second. There we go. So this is our sort of outline for today. The two strategies I will attempt to define for you, and then show you some ways that I've applied these to my art appreciation classroom. And then depending on kind of how our time looks at the end of the session today, or based on questions that you may have, I have a couple of suggestions for participant practice. So keep in mind as we go through today about how some of these strategies might be relevant to your own classes or to your own classroom experiences. Let me start by introducing myself. As Mitzi said, my name is Kate Peaslee. I've been here at Texas Tech since 2010, first as an instructor and more recently as a lecturer, for that whole time teaching the class of art appreciation. Art appreciation is one of our large enrollment classes here at Texas Tech. I typically have 190 students per section and 3 sections per semester. It is, as such, a non-major class, so it satisfies students' multicultural and creative arts core curriculum requirement. Last year, I applied for and received a teaching development scholarship through the TLPDC, and it allowed me to attend a conference focused on higher education teaching strategies. So I decided to go to the conference on higher education pedagogy, or CHEP, as they like to call themselves. This conference took place in February of 2020, or the before times, as I sometimes like to say. So it ended up being one of the last times really that I, certainly that I flew on a plane and really left Lubbock for any period of time. So kind of looking back on those eight months ago, it feels like, as I'm sure it made to you all, 5 years since I attended that conference. The conference took place at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, and the 2020 iteration was their 12th. So it's a pretty well-established pedagogy conference. It's virtual this year, as of course most of things are. I would recommend you check it out and take a look. It really was a great conference and a huge diversity of presentations. I saw about 12 sessions, attended about 12 over the 2 days that I was there. And so I've chosen 2 for presentation for you all today. And kind of interestingly, as part of my scholarship application to attend this conference, these are not 2 that caught my eye in their program descriptions. but they were two that had really the greatest impact on me as a participant in the session. And then they proved to be the strategies that I was able to implement in what felt like the most meaningful and direct way once returning back to campus. So the first is a strategy known as transparent assignment design through this development and workshop project called TILT, or Transparency in Learning and Teaching. So it may be something that you're familiar with, and I'll talk about why that could be in a few moments. But TILT is this award-winning national educational development and research project that helps faculty implement a transparent teaching framework to promote college student success, or at least that's the sort of language that they use. The TILT program is this ongoing series of workshops and surveys of both faculty and student participants. And its goal is to assess how students measure their own learning experiences and reflect upon their own strengths. The principal investigator and founder of this program, Dr. Mary Ann Winkleness, is the person who presented this at the conference, and she's based with at a Brandeis University in the Boston area. In kind of the most basic definition of this strategy, it's a sort of implementation of a strategy that can be applied to either a single assignment or to an entire course structure. So they seemed to kind of build themselves as being very customizable and flexible, which I have found to be true in my experience with it. Why I was really interested and kind of taken with this project is that from the outset, it really seemed to acknowledge issues related to inequity in the higher ed classroom, meaning, and as you may have experienced in your own classes as well, some students arrive to college on day one with that sort of training and language, vocabulary, and confidence needed to just successfully navigate the logistics of college and college level courses. And of course, a lot of other students arrive on day one without those same that same sort of skill set or experience. So this strategy really helps to even the playing field across the class to focus really on the course content rather than on potential roadblocks that come along with actual delivery of the content itself. The way that that occurs, or how that happens, is that transparent assignment design proposes this purpose, task, criteria model of assignment instructions, and it really invites the instructor to have a conversation with the students before the student actually begins the work. And for me, I recognized immediately in this session my own bias. I mean, I am lucky enough to have usually a team of TAs that help with grading and some of the course management, but I always do some of the grading, especially for our signature or kind of milestone assignments each semester. And I recognize that students may have really thoughtful ideas and analyses, but they sometimes lose points simply because they don't include a required component, or they lack that sort of smooth, familiar language of college level writing or even high school level writing, which makes it more difficult for their point to be communicated. So in art appreciation, there were a couple of different ways that I decided to try out this intervention with a couple of assignments. So again, my class is typically about 190 students. As a non-major class, I have students from across disciplines, and it is intended as an introductory level class. So mostly first year and second year students. I would say about 80% on average of my students are first or second year college students. One way that I immediately wanted to implement this transparent assignment design strategy was through one of our signature assignments in art appreciation. I call it a signature assignment because we assign it almost every semester. It can be really flexible. It's not a research project, but it allows students to sort of try out the skills that we've been talking about all semester long by looking at works of art in person. And so what I've added here for you. And you know what, let me see, I wonder if I can, yes, okay. What I've included on the screen here is just the first page of the typical assignment instructions for this, what we call in-person viewing of an artwork assignment. I'm going to drop for you, if you're interested in looking at it, in the chat. Here's the full document. You should be able to see that now on your end. This particular one is from fall 2017, so a couple of years ago, but is typical to what this assignment looks like. And you know, the crew of folks that are participating today, I know, are seasoned academics, faculty, and staff. Take a look at this, even just first page of the assignment, and I'll ask you to answer for me, what do you think is the purpose of this assignment? And I'm going to just shift forward a page. So refer maybe to that document I dropped in the chat. Does anyone want to venture a guess? Like, what would you say, just kind of looking over this assignment, what's the purpose of it?
Discovering elements and principles.
Yes, so discovering, sort of identifying elements and principles of art, partly. That's true. Anyone else have a thought about, oh, I see some things in the chat, maybe they're there. To go and see art in person, Erica says, yeah, that's certainly part of it too. We want them to go out into the community. I sort of suspect though, that it maybe isn't totally clear, or at least when I took my own eyes back to this assignment after going to this, 30-minute conference session, I thought to myself, like, oh my gosh, it's not totally clear. It starts in the first paragraph with like, go do this and go here on this day and take note of this, but there's no acknowledgement of really why we're asking them to do this assignment. And so truly immediately upon coming back from this conference in February, I was about ready to deploy the assignment, mid-semester, as is typically the case. So I just spent a couple of days revamping it. And what it ended up being was almost just a reorganization of material that was already in the assignment. So what I found so honestly, like, humbling and surprising was that this information was there. It just was not communicated very clearly. So this is what the first page of the assignment looks like now, where very clearly from the outset, and I have kind of a side-by-side comparison for us to consider. In the after version, it's very clear, even just some of the logistics, when the assignment is due, how much of the grade it's worth, how long it should be. And then there's a clear statement of purpose. What is it that we want you to do? What skills are you going to be asked to kind of activate through the process of this assignment? And then the tasks, the actual very straightforward tasks of the assignment are listed here very clearly. So it has proven to be, I think, at least for me, a strategy that forces me to really understand that purpose behind why we're asking students to do various assignments. And one, I think, really interesting conclusion that was drawn by Dr. Winklemas in this conference presentation too, was that from the student perspective, there is occasionally a slight increase in grade, occasionally. But what they have really noticed and gathered through the data from their surveys of the students is that there's a boost in their academic confidence, and there's a boost in their sense of belonging in college. So instead of being faced with this document that in order to complete, they first have to sort of translate for themselves, they're allowed to just access directly that material, to do these tasks, to have this sense of understanding before they even start to put words on the paper. And for a class like art appreciation, this to me was such a huge really revelation. I'm teaching non-major students. We are not trying to turn them into art majors or art historians. We're really trying to both expose them to visual art from around the world, but really to help cultivate those skills necessary for a successful college experience, whether that be like coming to class regularly, following instructions, creating a relationship with your TA, with your instructor. These are part of our goals of art appreciation as well. So this was just such a clear and easy way for me to do that with this assignment that we've been using, semester after semester. So in spring of 2020, this was kind of that quick translation of this idea from this teaching strategy into one of our assignments. I'm trying to slowly integrate it more largely as well. This semester, art appreciation is taught as one of our hybrid classes. What that means for me is we do a traditional lecture on Monday and Wednesday, and in our Friday classes, instead of a lot of the work they would do outside of class, like discussion boards or small writing exercises, I've turned them into group assignments on Fridays. So we come, I deploy the instructions, they have 30 minutes to work in small groups through breakout rooms and Zoom to complete this task. And I have used this purpose, task, criteria model across the group assignments. In part, we're doing 12 of these. We just finished our 10th. We have our 11th of 12 this week. So that's a lot. And instead of them learning a new format of instruction page every week, at least we have this familiar template where by now, even though what it is they're being asked to do changes every week, the way it's presented, that basic model remains the same. And for me too, it has forced me to each Friday think about why is it that I'm asking them to do this particular assignment? So making them really aware at the outset of what they are going to do and why before they actually start learning the details about, how to do it.
And Kate, I think that's so powerful because I would assume that students are taking art appreciation pretty early in their college career. So that doing that many times throughout the semester really trains them to look for those three elements and maybe empowers them to ask those questions in classes when maybe that's not utilized. I love that.
Mitzi, that's exactly it. This is the week where, as part of their assignment, I'm going to have them write a group assignment for their task this week. So they get to take on this role of stating a purpose, outlining the task, identifying the criteria. And and part of our conversation about this week's assignment will be, now this template and model, look for it in other classes when you're not quite sure where to begin. Ask for it if you feel like there is a real barrier to communication between instructor and class. And frankly, outside of the classroom as well, I would love to see greater transparency in people's managerial styles, in industry, in the world outside of higher ed. I am probably optimistic to a fault sometimes, but I see it as really this simple shift that can be really profound. Criticism that I've had posed to me about this model, as I've talked about it with colleagues and others, is that, part of college is learning how to navigate these sort of structures to prepare them for the world outside of college, and we can't hold their hand too much, essentially. But I think I disagree with that. I think we're doing them a disservice and also it calls to mind that equity issue, that on the first day of class, regardless if a student is a first-year student or a third-year student, some students just have the privilege and experience of vocabulary, fluency, competence, confidence that others do not. And so this to me is a way of really just leveling that playing field. And you're exactly, it's like I planted that comment in your mind because that's what we're talking about this week as we sort of kind of finish out these group assignments. I want to really make them aware of what I've been doing because I haven't made it explicit so far, and let them try it on themselves And then hopefully, and I'll ask them to sort of take it with them, outside of class, because it's been a really effective strategy, not just for them, but frankly, for me. It forces me to really crystallize and make clear what it is that I'm asking them to do.
And Kate, I was gonna just tell you too, I've gotten that pushback from people as well when I've talked about this method. And I've told them really who you're helping are people that may not be prepared. So people who come to school with a really, like, either a parent or school that's already taught them how to do that, they're going to know how to do that. So you're really helping the people who haven't been taught that yet. So I always tell people to make those things more explicit to people who may not come in with that experience. And I feel like that pushes back a little bit on people being like, you're just spoon feeding. I'm like, well, it actually helps everybody out, but it especially helps out the people who may not have had as much of a privileged high school experience, or have the privilege of a parent that knows how to read jargon, in their field. So
absolutely. Yeah, that's a really great point. And one thing I discovered as I was sitting in this conference in a classroom in Virginia Tech is that one of the people who literally wrote the book on this strategy and this topic is our very own Suzanne Tapp. And so it's a strategy that I have since noticed and seen in other sessions like this that I've attended. Erica, I went to one of your breakout room sessions, like training sessions. I don't remember, the end of spring or summer. But you, even in that session, use that purpose, task, criteria model. And at first I was like, oh, I went all the way to Virginia Tech to learn about something that is already part of the foundation of our TLPDC here at Tech. But then once I got over that sort of embarrassment, I was so proud and thankful to be part of this community who is really like finger on the pulse of what I think are up-to-date and effective teaching strategies.
Well, and I think some people think it's like too simple too, right? They'll be like, this is too simple. And I like that there's actual research that backs it up and says, like, this actually, we know that it works, because not all of the teaching strategies that we share always have that like evidence-based.
Well, and I love that the evidence that's used to sort of validate or maybe just follow up on the research related to transparent assignment and design is both qualitative and quantitative. That there's a study in grades and numerical scores and how there is this increase across the board, but it's also about that qualitative sense of confidence and belonging, which really, I think can't be understated in a student's college experience. I think that's something that a lot of us are probably missing this semester. I know myself included as a faculty member, I miss that sense of community. I miss that sense of belonging. And so if we can help to, in these small, simple ways, cultivate that or grow that or experience that for our students, I think that's really the best of both worlds. So you're right, because it seems so simple, it really for me was a rearranging of material that was already there in those assignment instructions, but it just seemed to be so much more effective, both in the creation of those assignments and certainly I think in the reception of those. And that's actually, it's kind of an interesting thinking about this idea of something both simple and profound. Is I think a great segue into the second topic I want to talk about today, or second strategy, called Phenomenological Pedagogy. And at this conference, at the CHEP conference, this was a session led by two scholars from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And they are the current directors and founders of what they call the Transdisciplinary Phenomenology Research Group at UT Knoxville. It was Drs. Kathy Greenberg and Dr. Brian Sohn who led this session. Now, phenomenological pedagogy is this strategy that has its roots or origins, to my knowledge, in the early 20th century in the field of education. And within higher ed, it's something that's been adopted over the decades by various disciplines: nursing, psychology, business, forestry, I believe, are the most sort of common applications of it. In essence, what this strategy asks is that as teachers, as instructors, that we value the personal experiences of our students or of our learners. It's the student-centered perspective that takes priority in the learning process. And I admit my huge caveat to talking about this is that it was an incredibly moving conference session to be a part of. It was truly sort of emotional. And I've only begun to really scratch the surface of the history of this strategy and the really best practices for implementing it. So what I want to talk about is the kind of lessons I've taken from it and how I've applied it to class. And it has been especially essential in this kind of COVID era classroom and some of the changes that we've frankly been kind of forced to take on and to navigate. It really focuses on, for me, my understanding of phenomenological pedagogy is on student reflection. It makes them very aware of the learning process, and it increases their sense of being an agent, having this kind of agency in the work, as opposed to just being an object of my teaching. So for me, or sort of the key thread that I use as I've applied it in a variety of different ways that I'll talk about to you today, is I use reflection, self-reflection for the students as a means of promoting what I frankly think can be transformative learning. So let me see if I can kind of clarify that a little bit more for you. Again, the end of this conference ended up coinciding with this, weeks later, we shifted in the spring to kind of an emergency online format. And one of the first assignments that the class was scheduled to complete based on our syllabus, that had been, of course, in place prior to COVID, were a number of discussion boards. This is kind of a common assignment for art appreciation, where I pose some questions to them, they answer my prompts, and then they respond to each other. I'm sure you all are familiar with either participating in or using these discussion boards. It's, in my experience, they're okay. It's an okay way to ask students to collaborate, especially in a large format classroom. It's difficult to do that in a meaningful way in person. So the discussion board allows us a little bit of access to that. So when we came back, I think it was right after spring break was our next discussion board. I decided to take this COVID situation that we were living in and ask them to reflect upon it in the context of what I called creative problem solving. So you can see the instructions for the assignment are listed here. And I preface it by saying, what we've been looking at all semester long are individuals, artists who have this creative mindset in representing or making sense of the world around them. And so I asked them to consider from their own perspective to choose either what professional field they hoped to join after college, a job they currently had, or some sort of group or organization, and consider the way that those groups have used creative problem solving in addressing the crisis of the pandemic. And if you'll recall, in those early weeks, there were lots of different examples of this from both professional fields all the way down to like grocery delivery and restaurant, service industry contexts. So they had so much to say. It was so wonderful. This is an assignment that the TAs graded, and my TAs across the board in this assignment were struck. They reached out to me about the quality of work that they were reading, about the level of engagement of the students that they had not seen prior to this time. And frankly, I felt like for the TAs, it was a way for them to get a sense of like grounding or this kind of something concrete in the midst of this time of flux. And so it just highlighted for me, and it was in the back of my mind, this idea of starting with and prioritizing that student experience and using that as an impetus for thinking about whatever it is that the course content is related to. I mean, I think all of us want to think that our classes are universally relevant, and this is a way to really demonstrate that or show that to the student without just telling them that that is the case, like thinking about, yes, creativity is part of engineering. It's part of business. It's part of restaurant industries or whatever the case may be. So that was a really kind of interesting and I thought quite successful way to integrate this strategy sort of right off the bat. I revisited this assignment this semester in the fall, but added the element of reflecting on how well or not this strategy is working, because now we have the advantage of time. It's been 6-8 months or however long it's been now, where a lot of these interventions have taken place in different fields and industries, and some are working. And there's some things that I don't know about you, but for me, I'm like, gosh, I want to keep doing this, whatever it is, after the pandemic is hopefully over someday. But some things just are not a satisfying replacement for the way that it was before. So we sort of added that level of reflection to a similar sort of assignment this semester. Another way that I thought about phenomenological pedagogy in the context of art appreciation came this summer. I oftentimes will teach a summer class. Usually it's only about 50 students instead of our usual 200. It's almost always in person, but this summer, just per TTU policy, it shifted to fully online, which was a new experience for me. I have a little bit of experience teaching online, not a ton. And I felt this immediate need to want to connect in some sort of real or authentic way with the students at the very beginning of the class. Summer classes, as you know, are short. They're only these kind of 5-week and brief. They feel quite brief, even though the contact hours and whatnot are the same. So I assigned them to schedule a one-on-one meeting with me in the first week of class. So they had, we had a Google sign-up sheet and they just picked a time and date. And I say I assigned it. I assigned it like it was an assignment, but there was no point value associated with it, in part because I didn't want to make it about earning points. I wanted just to give them this opportunity to have a conversation with their real teacher while we were about to start this. It was an asynchronous online class. Many of them did. I would say a majority of them scheduled this meeting and completed it. It was a 15-minute Zoom meeting. I had a couple of questions that I asked them to prepare in advance, like, are there any artists that you know of that you want to know more about this class? Any other topics, just sort of asking them for some feedback, which I took note of and incorporated in a few ways, but really it was just a chance for us to have a conversation. How are you feeling? How are you doing? Have you taken online classes before? That sort of thing. So once the first week was finished and these meetings were finished, frankly, I kind of forgot about them until the class was over, the term was over. And I decided to go back and see if I could draw any conclusions about the students who completed the one-on-one meeting with me and those who didn't. And so I just did a quick little spreadsheet here. And what you're looking at are the final grades of I think it was 47 students in the class. And then the one indicates that they completed the one-on-one meeting with me. And if it's incomplete, they didn't. Now, I realize that there are other factors at play here, that a student who is likely to do an assignment that doesn't actually have a point value is a fairly self-motivated and disciplined student who would likely successfully complete the tasks as they're assigned anyway, and so likely to score high with their final grade. But I thought it was the distribution here of especially those who did not complete the one-on-one meeting and the lower grade that they ended up with in the class was really striking to me, and told me that at some level that there was a buy-in that's created in that first week. Like, I want to hear what you have to say about this. I know who you are. I'm glad that you're here. This sort of accountability that, at least in my limited experience, is hard to create in an asynchronous online environment. So that was an interesting strategy that, in looking back, looked like it was related to this phenomenological pedagogy idea. And then one last example that, again, is probably a real stretch when we're talking about applying this phenomenological pedagogy to class, but I think I can make the connection. So here we are at the near end of the semester. The classes I mentioned, art appreciation is hybrid this semester. And as a result, I feel like there has been a greater burden put upon the students than typical in my class to show up even though we're not tracking and have punitive measures related to attendance, to complete work on their own, to make sure that they're following the schedule and the syllabus, because just a lot of it is a result of their own discipline in the midst of, you know, what admittedly is a really kind of chaotic and anxiety-ridden and somewhat traumatic world that we live in. So this is the time of year where inevitably I'm getting these requests about extra credit and how do I recuperate my grade and things aren't going well and how can you help me? And usually I pride myself on being, you know, addressing these individual emails on their own, not holding students responsible for the 20 other emails of the same kind that I've already answered that day. I try really hard to address them sort of one-on-one. But I decided to kind of flip the strategy a little bit this semester. And I'm asking them, before I give them my list of recommendations of how to improve in the last month of class, I have them answer these two questions for me first. Like, what part has been unclear so far? And where have you struggled and why do you think that is? So in a way, and it's only happened a handful of times so far. This has really been in the last week or two. And so far, they sort of answer their own question in the end. When I ask them to look back and think about what are the areas that have been problematic, rarely, almost never, is it because the content is too difficult and they don't understand it. Instead, it's just it's a matter of time management and discipline. And so again, thinking about these lessons to learn early on in your college career, this to me, I think, has the potential to be a pretty good one. I don't want them to feel also like I'm just sort of setting them adrift and not answering their question. And I tell them, I'll give you some strategies. Please just answer these for me first. Let's sort of get on the same page before we look at, you know, how to move forward. So I don't know, it looks like we're about 40 minutes into the session, and I know we're just kind of a small group here, but I promised some prompts for participant practice. So I wonder what you all think about this. Do you already use this purpose, task, criteria model in your class assignments, or has there come to mind an occasion where this could be sort of relevant for those of you who are faculty and instructors?
Sure, I'll jump in, Kate. I have used it the last time I taught, and I tried to do it. It was a new prep for me, so I tried to do it in all of the classes, at least a little bit, even if it was just a sentence for each of these three things, because I wanted them to start to kind of expect it. And so I would try and at least be able, it helped me have some clarity on my end of what I was really, because it was a intro level class, it was introduction to women's studies, it was the first time I had taught that class. I wanted to be sure that I was being really purposeful in my assignments and that I knew why I was asking them to do what I wanted them to do, because I was kind of looking at a lot of different people's teaching materials to see what assignments would be. So I started it I always do a get to know you survey at the beginning of the semester. So I started it on that and really clearly laid out. I always say that in class. I say a lot of these things, but I've realized that maybe some people miss that, you know, by the time they get back and they have so many other things going on, just reading that again and knowing, oh, this is why she's having us do this. She doesn't want my phone number because she's going to call me. She wants my phone number in case of an emergency, you know, and I left something in the classroom or something, you know. So just being really clear on why I'm asking them, especially that first assignment, for some personal information.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's interesting, because what struck me about this model was, as somebody who's taught the class for what seems like forever, for a decade, 3 times a semester, you know, for me, it was such a helpful prompt too. Like, why am I asking them to do this assignment every semester. So it felt like it was such this breath of fresh air, even for me, to challenge me to revamp and rework and think about, I think that familiarity to coming to expect it. I love that idea. I think is a really helpful part of that model or that template. I'm curious too, what y'all think about this phenomenological pedagogy. And I would not be surprised if any of you all are much more well-versed in, the history and application of this idea more than I am. I almost feel sheepish saying that that's what I'm talking about, because I really am taking what to me were the most moving parts of this session, these reflections that students were having, as then later relayed to us by their faculty members. And I thought, like, gosh, I want my students to have that sense of just awareness and gratitude related to their college learning experience. And so the ways that I'm trying to kind of sprinkle it into the classroom, I'm not sure. I'm a work in progress as far as that goes. And I would be curious to hear about various ways that you all have, tried to make that explicit connection between a student's own life or even things going on in the world with what's happening in a classroom or with your course content.
Kate, a course that I teach very often it used to be called Child and Adolescent Guidance, and now it's Understanding Child and Adolescent Behavior. And the common assignment for the course is to write a philosophy of guidance paper. And I always tell them to tailor that to what they want to do with the course material. So I have a fair amount that want to teach, but now I have so many that want to go into pre-professional health careers or counseling or ministry. And I always have them try to tailor that, you're based on your goal to become a child life specialist. What elements that you've learned do you plan to implement? And it's been so powerful, because not only are they thinking about what they've learned in real time, but how they'll apply it in the future in their career. And I think that has been a helpful way to kind of intersect their future experiences and what they plan to do.
Yes, it seems like you're making them have some intentionality with the way that they're kind of working through the class. Oh, that's great.
Right. Yeah. And before I had that, I feel like people just kind of completed that assignment. Check, check, check. These are the elements of the class that I found, most interesting. But interesting is one thing, but why will it apply to what you'll be doing? That kind of takes it to a different level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, thanks you guys for sharing that. And I really I'm so grateful for this, the existence of scholarships like the one that you all offer to even instructors like myself. I'm not a tenure track faculty member, but my interim department chair last year called my attention to it. She said, hey, you should check this out. It's open to instructors as well, which is not, always the case with grants and scholarships and things. So it was in so many unexpected ways, especially related to travel and networking and professional development in an in-person environment. It was incredibly memorable. And it really has been something that I have kind of taken with me beyond those sessions and, tried to incorporate in these variety of ways. And I think they've added some kind of meaningful changes to the curriculum again, which has been a familiar one for us here at Tech. So thank you, TLPDC, for that opportunity. I don't know if I would have done it otherwise. So that was really wonderful.
I also wanted to say I saw a lot of good connection between the phenomenology and their reflective experience in service learning, since that's a really big part of the service learning experience, is because a lot of times we really have to draw out those connections that students make between their service and their course content, and how that's going to, grow and develop over time and how it will fit into the workplace. Sometimes we really have to show them how that connects. And so that critical reflection is such a part of that. I think that this pedagogy would couple well with this other, you know, and I'm sure there's work on both. But I think that anytime you're asking them to reflect on either a specific experience or their lived experience is really important to get them to do, because I think that that's some higher level thinking that sometimes students don't get exposed to until college, and they're a little uncomfortable with, or sometimes people think it's a little too feel good, you know, and how will this work? But I think that it's important, and I always tell people in service learning that sometimes I think it's a developmental stage. They're just in the here and now, you know, I've got to get through this class. It's hard to know how to reflect on how to connect that to what I'll be doing in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. The service learning classes have that sort of as part of their identity and mission already. Sometimes what's hard in a large enrollment class is to take all those really wonderful things about college and meaningfully, authentically translate them to a room of 200 students. And I wish, you know, we do a little like think, pair, share in a you know, before times world. It's hard. I feel like we have these little sort of morsels that we can incorporate in an authentic way in a big classroom. And so
that's
these little strategies to me were so helpful in just guiding even the way an assignment is written or prompts for them to think about.
Sure. When I always think in the larger classes, if you're getting 200 reflective essay, like that's a lot of grading. Like you can't have them frequently reflect. I mean, or I'm not great at that. So how can you add in smaller reflective practices where you're not, I mean, it's such important work, but you can't grade, you know, 5 of those a semester. Like, you know, it'd just be too much. So.
Erica, you make a good point, and I think I'll recommend that our service learning faculty fellows view this this presentation, because Kate, I think a lot of the things you're saying can be very very connected to that.
Oh, thank you.
And
I'm glad to hear that from you. I consider you both, you know, experts in this field, and so I just sometimes it does feel a little. I can be a little like touchy-feely with my approach to education, but it's just is so important and gratifying that when we can root it in these kind of concrete examples, I think it demonstrates how really kind of effective it could be in part of this kind of holistic, comprehensive education approach that we put forth here at Texas Tech. So thank you.
Graciously reference Suzanne's work in the TILT framework. I wanted you to know that there are a couple of other workshops that we've had, one that Erica and Suzanne hosted together, and then one that Suzanne did right before the beginning of the semester about things to do to get ready for your class. So those are dropped in the chat. And then my colleagues from the TLPDC, if you can think of other workshops, if you want to drop those in as well, that reference the TILT framework or any of these elements.
Thank you for adding those. Yeah, I'm clicking on them right now so I can bookmark them.
I think even the TILT model is really good for service learning, because I think we often hear from service learning students like, why am I doing this? I'm taking this class and now I have to volunteer. Like, so really setting a really clear purpose and what they'll gain from it, I think is important in those classes where sometimes it is a little more abstract, right? Like, why am I going to go and, you know, raise money or volunteer my time at these places? And really it helps you lay that out. Because I think sometimes as a teacher, like it's really clear in our mind how those things connect, but and we see a bigger, you know, we're seeing a bigger perspective, but to then have to articulate that in a way that's, you know, not so super long either, that's quick and get those points across is really important.
I agree. I found it helpful too with TA mentorship. When asking them to write an assignment for the class, or again, they may have some idea about what they want them to do, but that question of why, like, why are we asking them to do that? It's so simple, but can be really helpful in just guiding the construction of that task. So yeah, it's been,
I agree.
You know, that I was just so grateful to learn that, of course, it has already been part of the curriculum and development here at the TLPDC. So it was really fun to see it referenced in this giant, you know, conference session of thousands of educators, you know, on the other side of the country. So it was really great.
We appreciate your willingness to share this information, Kate. That's part of the purpose, I think, of the Lawrence Schovanec Faculty Development Scholarship, is that hopefully, you know, you'll bring the good information back, and that many of your colleagues here can benefit.
Yeah, well, I really was happy to be able to do it, and frankly, happy to be forced to like articulate it in this way in kind of presentation form. It's one thing to apply it to the classroom, but then to sort of share that information across the community is another. I was, in the end, grateful to have that requirement as part of it as well. So yeah, thank you so much.